I'm Doug Nelson, and you're listening to the ABMP Podcast, a podcast that speaks to the massage and bodywork community. A few weeks ago, I presented at a global conference of social workers on how much our professions can learn from each other. At the beginning of the presentation, I shared with them an example of how learning about something in their field of social work deepened my understanding of functional anatomy. And I told them the story of how this started. I had a client many years ago who brought in a book, and I said, "What are you reading?" And he said, "Well, oh no, it wouldn't be of interest," which piqued my interest. And he said, "No, I didn't mean it that way. It's just that this is something specific to my profession." So, of course, my interest was even greater. And this is what the prone position is for, because as soon as he was prone, I wrote down the title of the book and read it. And in a way, he was right. It was about family systems therapy, family dynamics, but it was really about systems thinking with regard to social work and families. Because I didn't know anything about social work and family systems, I think it actually helped me because I was a good learner. I didn't assume that I knew anything. But as I was reading that, I substituted muscles for family members, and all of a sudden it sort of hit me. And this is not something that some of my early teachers like Moshe Feldenkrais weren't trying to tell me, but I was too young and too naive. I don't know, whatever. It just didn't click. But somehow seeing it in that context and translating it from family systems, I finally, in a way, understood what they've been trying to tell me for years. So my message to that group, that conference, was it helped me to begin to think in systems, not symptoms. And in reality, that took years, and it's still clearly an unfolding process. And in a way, this was amplified yesterday by a conversation I had with my friend Bob, who's just a brilliant guy. And he always inspires me with his insights, and we exchange ideas and thoughts about concepts we've been thinking about. And he shared with me an idea that he's been kind of consumed with lately, and that is compounding. Well, since he's in the financial world, I thought compounding makes sense, assuming he meant compounding interest. But as he explained to me, he was thinking about compounding from a very different, much larger perspective, which immediately resonated with me. In integrated and interrelated systems, small effects cascade to become much larger forces over time, in the same way that perhaps an investment collects interest, which then adds to the principal, which accumulates more interest, and on, and until one day, maybe you look at a retirement account you completely forgot about, and you're kind of shocked at how much it's grown. Or maybe the other direction, conversely, you fall behind payments on your credit card, and now you're paying interest on the interest, and that hole can seem completely insurmountable over time. That's the power of compounding. And that context for the power of compounding really is in the system in which it resides. Anything in isolation isn't really subject to compounding force, but truthfully, very few things exist in isolation, and I can't think of a more integrated, interrelated system than the human body. To take one example, if you have one marker from a blood test that's a little off, by itself, whatever, not an issue. But then add a second marker that's off, whatever. But you keep adding things that are off, and then all of a sudden, you're now in a world of trouble, kind of a metabolic syndrome, where none of these things by itself is particularly dangerous, but the aggregate effect of all of them is a really big deal. So let's think about that and compounding as it relates to musculoskeletal health. So let's imagine this scenario. Gary's a new retiree, and he's thrilled to have some time to pursue something other than work. He used to play golf years ago, and several of his friends who've been playing, kind of getting together every weekend to play, invite him to join them on the course and bring golf back into his life and reconnect with friends now that he's got the time to do it. So he's all in, and he spends time on the driving range in earnest, and he's trying to get his game back and both rediscover golf and time with friends that he just hasn't connected with. But here's the physical reality. Gary has a limitation in internal rotation of his right hip. It's just not as flexible like he used to be. And that's not something he ever noticed at his work, or it never limited his weekend activities. There's no pain. Maybe he just felt stiff sometimes, but it's not something that ever was on his radar screen. But in the golf swing, limited internal rotation will inhibit your ability to have a full backswing. And for those of you who play, you know that the farther back the club goes, it has to come farther forward, which means it has more speed when you hit the ball, and therefore the ball goes farther. And to make matters worse, Gary's job involved a lot of sitting, and he had no idea how stiff his thoracic spine had become. In the golf swing, one way to make up for lack of hip rotation is just to make up for it in thoracic rotation. But Gary can't do that. In fact, his thoracic rotation limitation makes his backswing even more limited than it would have been with the hip alone. So now, with that limitation, Gary's tee shots fall way far short of his friends. Not just short, but embarrassingly so. And as a result, the only way to keep up with his friends is try to swing the club as hard as he can, and that means using his arms. So guess what? Gary now experiences pain at his elbow, probably, medial epicondylar pain, and now he goes to seek help. You can imagine that whatever environment Gary visits, the emphasis is going to be on the presenting symptom, his elbow. Medication, bracing, splinting, dry needling, transverse friction, careful palpation. You can freeze it, you can fry it, you can microwave it. Whatever you do, ultimately, results are unlikely. Because again, this is a product of a whole system of events. And likely, in our system, Gary's going to be told, you need to rest your arm. So no golf for a month. Well, in the meantime, his friends continue to play, and the gap between Gary's skills and their skills just continues to widen. And really now, if you compound this even farther, now Gary decides, you know what? I'm just not really good at golf, and I can't do this. So think about that. So now Gary's friends kind of go on without him. They have a whole social system built around golf that Gary's no longer a part of. What are the consequences of that for Gary's life? I hope you see how this applies to everyday practice in the clinic. Symptoms are outcomes of the context that created them, and you can't change an outcome unless you change the system that created it. And believe me, that's been tried a lot. But we learned in primary school that you can't change something on the right side of the equation without changing something on the left side of the equation as well. Yet in so many contexts, that's exactly what we try to do. And in the world of musculoskeletal pain, people just want the presenting symptom to improve and go away. I have to say, in my career, the first hurdle was just to clearly and precisely understand what was hurting. In Gary's case, it would be exactly which muscle or structure is involved. It's a necessary step, but it's just the first step. What is one question, why is another. And really, this leads me to talk about the fallacy of efficiency. In an effort to save time, effort, and money, we just want to cut to the chase with a really simple solution, which is a nice idea, often a bad reality. I think it was H.L. Mencken said, for every complex question, there's a simple, direct, and wrong answer. With regard to someone like Gary and efficiency, think about it. How are my MD friends supposed to solve Gary's issue in one 12 to 15-minute visit? Or my PT friends who might get a limited number of sessions that they are to see Gary and a script that only allows them to touch the area that he presents with? The only reasonable strategy at that point is a symptom-first mentality. When I think about this kind of concept, I have to say it always makes me think of Benjamin Franklin during the Revolutionary War. I don't know if you remember, but he was sent to France to try to secure financial support from the French to help support the war effort. And of course, while he was in France, he attended numerous social events. He was building relationships with his engaging personality and his amazing social skills. And hearing of Franklin's social calendar and all the parties he was going to, John Adams was back at home just screaming at him, going, "Just ask for the money!" But Franklin understood systems, and he understood social networks, and most importantly, relationships. The currency is trust, and trust is earned through relationships. Franklin understood systems, worked the system, and yes, we did get the money, but not by just going over there and just give me money because this is important. It doesn't really work that well. And I think, too, we often want to make an efficient process out of something that's inherently inefficient. The bigger and more complex the system, the less you can apply simple, quote-unquote, efficient strategies. Big systems are just too complex, and they have too many variables, and it takes time, patience, and a deep understanding to see the intervention play out through the system. Just to be clear, no therapist I know, certainly not me, would think to check Gary's hip as the first response to medial epicondylar pain. Furthermore, if you did start there, Gary comes in with an arm that's hurting and you immediately start treating his hip, I don't think Gary would ever come back for the second session because you made a massive leap without taking Gary on that leap and that journey of understanding with you, and you would probably just lose him. And believe me, I've seen that done far too often. Therapists that kind of out-clever themselves. You have to take the client with you, in this case, without Gary understanding how the hip is related to his arm overuse. He's not going to follow through on any treatment plan that you have or do the things that he might need to do to make that successful. So in reality, with systems like this, more often it's piece by piece, layer by layer, we discover the underlying processes at work that created the offending symptom. Even Sherlock Holmes didn't know the identity of the criminal when first viewing the crime scene, but the identity was revealed with keen observational skills and endless curiosity. And I suppose, really, this is why preventative strategies are so undervalued. The hero is the person who solves the egregious, the outrageous, immediate crisis. But who showers accolades on the person who prevents the problem from ever surfacing in the first place? A condition never to be is one that is never recognized. I think about that a lot when clients ask me this question, and I bet people have asked you the same thing. Gosh, what do people do that don't do this? That just happened again today with one of the people that I saw today. Really, there's no control group to see what would happen if the tissue restrictions that we dealt with were unaddressed. But I have to say, I do think about that every time I change somebody's range of motion or help them regain ease of movement in some area of their body. I imagine both the possible trajectory of this restriction untreated and also the new directions it might take after our work and the improvements have been gained. So I would pose this to you as well. The next time you release an area of restriction, release chronically held stress in the body, or maybe just brighten somebody's day, think about the power of compounding and the privilege we have to use our skills to create not just a better now, but potentially a better future as well. It's a powerful force for good in the world. A seemingly small improvement over time and increased exponentially through compounding can have massive implications. And that should give all of us hope that big changes are possible. One small step, one improvement at a time.